It all started with a glance. One of those silent, lingering stares that says everything words never could. George didn't wave. He didn't smile. I was tired of being invisible, so I simply let him look. Most people underestimate the power of silence. They assume words are the beginning of love. But for me, silence was where it began. Watching him rake the same patch of dry grass again and again, pretending not to notice that I was holding a book I wasn't truly reading. We both leaned into the rhythm of it. I kept living alone, trying to rebuild an identity that wasn't shaped by abandonment. He lived across the street, in a house full of noise but empty in every other way. You wouldn't expect a man like him to notice someone like me, quiet, careful, more than 20 years younger. His face carried creases that looked permanent, stories he never told. His wife was often away, and when she was home, she seemed louder than the house could hold. The kind of woman who filled every space with her presence, leaving none for anyone else. I watched him shrink in his own home. Now and then, in the early morning when the world was still soft with sleep, I'd catch him looking at me. He'd pretend to fix something that didn't need fixing, just to linger outside while I sat with tea on my porch. There was no flirting, no smiles, just a tension, growing between us like ivy wrapping around our quiet mornings. It started as a duet, nothing physical, nothing romantic, just something subtle and slow. A connection built in silence. The way he'd nod instead of speak. The way I stayed on the steps just a little longer than I needed to. We were cautious, too aware of what this could mean. But neither of us pulled away. I kept telling myself he was just a neighbor, that I was imagining it, that it didn't mean anything if my heart raced when he looked my way. But then I found myself choosing dresses I wouldn't normally wear, letting my hair down more often. I'd sit outside around the time I knew he'd return home. It wasn't for him. Not really. But the third time I caught him staring, like he'd forgotten how to breathe, I stopped lying to myself. One afternoon, I was washing my car in the driveway. The street was quiet, the sun high. I felt his gaze as I leaned to scrub the wheel. I didn't turn to look. I just kept moving, focused on each breath, each motion. He stood at his fence, holding a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. When I finally looked up, our eyes locked, and for a moment, something electric passed between us. Not lust, not love, just awareness. He didn't say a word. He nodded as always and walked back inside. But that silence was different. It held everything we hadn't said. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking of him, of how strange it felt that someone could make you feel so seen with just a glance. I had known love before, dated men, been loved, but they'd always seen the version of me I carefully curated. George saw the parts one usually kept hidden. The next morning, I opened my door to find a small bag hanging from the porch. Lemons, freshly picked from his tree. No note, no message. I closed my eyes and held the bag to my chest. The following week, I baked lemon muffins and left some at his door. Again, no note. Just that same quiet rhythm of unspoken understanding. He started offering to help with things I never mentioned were broken. A cracked tile, a squeaky gate, a loose shutter. He never stayed long, just enough to remind me he noticed that he was there. And each time he left, it felt like he left a little more of himself behind. I kept telling myself I could handle it, that nothing would happen, that this delicate, undefined bond between us would stay silent. But then I started dreaming about him, waking up with his name on my lips. I hated how much I waited for him, how aware I became of his absence. This wasn't how I was supposed to feel. Not about someone else's husband. At night, I'd sit by the window and watch the kitchen light in his house flicker off. I'd wonder if he was thinking about me too. One night, the rain came hard, the kind of storm that makes you light candles and listen to the wind like it's trying to tell you something. I was pouring myself a cup of tea when I heard a knock. It was him, soaked from the downpour, jacket clinging to him, flashlight in hand. He looked at me and said softly, "Just wanted to make sure you're okay." I nodded and let him in. We didn't say much. I handed him a towel. He dried his hair, then stood by the table, watching candlelight flicker through the glass. The air was thick, not just with rain, but with all the things we hadn't said. He looked at me in a way that made everything clear, the longing, the sadness, the hunger for something gentle. "You look peaceful," he murmured. I couldn't speak. I didn't know what to say. I just waited there, heart pounding, while the world tilted slightly on its axis. He didn't kiss me. He didn't touch me. He just stood there for a long, long time. Then he turned and walked out the door. I didn't sleep that night. Something had shifted inside me. Something I couldn't put back. Not because I was afraid, but because deep down I didn't want to. After that, the days dragged. He didn't visit. He didn't leave lemons. No quiet greetings from across the road, just a silence that felt heavier than before. I tried to tell myself this was for the best. That even if nothing happened, maybe he felt guilty for crossing that invisible line. That maybe that silence wasn't rejection, but shared confusion. A reflection of everything we'd felt and didn't know how to express. And so, I stayed away from the porch when I knew he'd be coming home. But one night, I let myself slip. I drifted into the rhythm of music, letting my body move as if no one was watching. I'd forgotten the curtains were open, forgotten the world outside still existed. I wasn't dancing to be seen. I was moving because something in me needed to feel alive. And then I saw him, standing outside again. I hadn't expected anyone to notice. It was like he'd been pulled back into my world the moment I tried to bury him. No reason. No flashlight. Just him, watching me like before. I could have closed the curtain. I could have stepped away. But I didn't. I let the music keep playing and stayed right in the center of the room. We both knew then. The line we'd been tiptoeing had already been crossed. His knock was soft, almost unsure. When I opened the door, we didn't speak. There were no excuses, no polite hesitations. I didn't invite him in. He didn't ask. Still, he stepped through the doorway like it had always been meant for him. He didn't touch me at first. He just stood there, breathing shallowly, eyes locked with mine, searching for permission, forgiveness, maybe even understanding. When his hand finally reached for mine, it was gentle and uncertain, as if he feared I might shatter. His fingers were warm, rough, trembling. I took his hand anyway. There was no urgency in the kiss that followed. It wasn't born of lust. It carried the weight of everything we'd hidden, years of emptiness, weeks of glances, lives lived pretending everything was fine. He kissed me like a man trying to remember what it felt like to be chosen. I kissed him like a woman who had forgotten what it meant to be needed. No chaos. No rush. Just grief, tenderness, and a quiet understanding between two people who were never supposed to find each other, but did. Afterward, we sat side by side in silence, like survivors of some unnamed event. Our knees barely touched. His hand stayed in mine. We weren't in love. We weren't strangers. We existed somewhere between fragile, real, and impossible. He left just before dawn. No promises. No discussion of what came next. Just a quiet goodbye, and a look that stayed with me long after the door closed. In the days that followed, nothing happened. And yet, everything had changed. He never returned. I didn't call for him. We passed each other on the street, exchanged fleeting glances through our windows. But no words. We didn't need them. There was no need to explain what had happened. No need to define it. He belonged to a life he couldn't leave. And I had no right to ask him to. I wasn't even sure I wanted him to. That night had nothing to do with the future. It was about the ache we both carried about being seen, truly seen, by another person, even if only for a moment. I still remember the softness in his eyes as he looked at me, not with desire, but recognition. He saw in me a calm he'd forgotten existed. And maybe that's all either of us ever really wanted. Not scandal, not passion, just someone who noticed us, without judgment or expectation. Sometimes, I still find myself at the window with a cup of tea, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. Not because I want more, but because I miss being seen. Not as a neighbor. Not as a fantasy. Just as a human being. He still lives across the street. His wife still comes and goes. Their house still echoes with the same old noise. On the outside, nothing has changed. But inside, everything has. I no longer feel invisible. And I like to believe he doesn't either. Sometimes, I wonder what he thinks when he sees me now. I don't ask myself if he regrets it, or if he remembers the feel of my hand in his. Some questions are better left unanswered. People talk about infidelity as if it's always selfish or reckless. But sometimes, it's just two people reaching for warmth in the darkness, drowning in their own loneliness. It's still not right. It's still not fair. But it's real. And I love the version of myself that George uncovered, even if I didn't fall in love with him. The woman who danced with abandon. Who stood still when someone looked at her like she mattered. The woman who felt whole for just one night. I don't tell the story often. It's mine, but not something I wear like a badge. Still, when the nights grow quiet and the air feels too thick, I remember the man he was with me, gentle, quiet, lost and aching. Maybe in another life, we'd have met again. Maybe we wouldn't have let each other go. But in this life, we were exactly what the other needed as things fell apart. And sometimes that's enough. There's peace in knowing that. A strange, bittersweet calm that lingers long after the storm is gone. I don't regret it, not because it was right, but because, for once, in the stillness of the night, I wasn't alone in my silence.